Hi, welcome. In this video, I want to take a couple minutes to provide some insight and context into the issue of a process by way of your role, okay, in advocating in terms of change, but also the issue of, how everything comes together by way of not just structure but also change itself. And again, I talk about the core ingredients by way of influence and control, how they align, how they come into a process the right way at the right level, to change perceptions of dogs the right way. And so again, there's always this question of, in terms of freedom, okay, how much freedom a dog has, but in terms of where that line is, in terms of, and here in this video, which talks about this, called micromanaging, okay, in the dog training world. So again, the question is, well, how much in terms of, micromanaging? Even when you look at my videos when I'm interacting with dogs, it'll come off looking somewhat tyrannical, okay, in terms of the level of structure, in terms of, interacting with. So I'm going to play some of this video. I'm going to respond to it because it's really important to understand. I'm going to talk about how everything comes together for a period of time. Okay, I'm going to relate this to the parenting example as well. But again, the problem when you don't get that right, when you're engaging a relationship problem in terms of approaching as a learning-based exercise, okay, and motivating dogs to respond at the very beginning, when you're in the middle of a relationship problem, I'm going to talk about why that becomes a problem, where you're never, okay, coming to a point of actually resolving a relationship problem. You're not actually getting to a point of diminishment of unwanted behavioral issues, because understand that it is about how everything aligns, the integrity of that, how it all comes together to affect change.
Historically, the dog training world has this view on training that is basically control the dog at all times, never.
So I'll stop here very quickly. So he's talking about control the dog at all times. Okay, so I talk about, again, the aspect of intentional control. Okay, but then the other piece you got to add on is, and this is the missing piece in the dog training world, is the change part of that. And so again, when I talk about change, okay, I'm talking about, a interaction based, okay, method, okay, that's going to bring in those core ingredients I talk about, influence and control, the right way, at the right level to generate what needs to be generated in the relationship between a dog and a owner. Okay, taking it down, approaching training relationship problem for what it truly represents, a intervention. Okay, so it's going to take the path of a power play. Okay, but again, the themes I talk about here is that power play situation. Again, we'll take this over to the parent example. How you want to see power plays, it's the same type of power play. And this is where I make the connection to, when I talk about relationship problem, in the example I use, is a parent-child example, in that once a child becomes selfish, okay, it changes everything, okay, but it also, brings a spotlight over onto at the social level, onto the role of parent, okay, in a way in which, again, looking at the parenting style that's in play, okay, you have to, in terms of causation. And then in terms of the themes I talk about, in terms of, I talk about parental influence, again, this is in the dog training world. There's so much confusion. You hear words such as discipline, punishment, corrections. Okay, but at the relationship level, I talk about the role of influence. Okay, that's the right way to define it. In terms of relationship, in terms of the parental role, and how you want to see influence, the same way parental influence, okay, is happening, okay, to affect change with a parent who's getting in the child's airspace in meaningful ways. This is where I talk about demand, okay? It's just like in terms of, truth revealed through a demand coming the right way through the parental role, pick up your toys because you're the parent. Versus, and here's this whole line thing, and talk about free will here as well, pick up your toys and here's a brand new Xbox game. So the problem here, when we talk about freedom, the free will of, say, even with the child, free will of the child, where's that line when a relationship problem's underway when the child's already selfish? See, that's the problem here is, and then you bring appearances into this. You know, you talk about agreeableness by way, again, the themes that are pervasive in the dog training world through this learning-based idea of things, but based, again, on how these trainers are engaging relationship problem, how they're motivating a response, is this issue about bribery, okay? And other themes that are in play, certain concepts such as counter conditioning, negotiation, accommodation, okay, is that it'll offer up the appearance of, you know, a say of a picture change by way of, you know, through agreeableness, um, but not the right way. The context isn't right. So, for example, through the concept of counter conditioning, you talk about all these themes I talk about in terms of, you know, of appearances, in terms of you know, talking about context. But when this theme is involved in terms of you know, bribery, and again the question is when this bribery becomes bribery. Well, bribery becomes bribery when you fail to consider the current state of the relationship, and those core ingredients are missing from the equation by way of control and influence, and you're seeking to motivate a response, and then you're assuming that the responses can be trusted, even through, say, counter conditioning with creating a different association to, say, a person or a situation, where you're using treats to gain agreeableness. But again, context is everything, okay? In terms of, you know, in terms of at a response level, in terms of the relationship, because again, just like the selfish child example, sure, you can bribe a selfish child to, you know, to come into agreement with, say, getting along, whereas otherwise, because of their bad attitude, they're selfish, they wouldn't. So you can quarterback as a parent, and you can engage in bribery, but though that moment in terms of where bribery is, you know, is the focal point, okay, to elicit a certain response, doesn't mean that those moments represent that, you know, the relationship's actually getting better. Okay, understand in the dog training world that's what's happening. Certain moments, trainers try to package up certain moments a certain way. You'll see it through how they market through social media, and you're not getting full transparency. This is why people will invest in this idea of things without understanding even what a process is to begin with. And this whole issue of free will, okay, understand this all plays into it because people's emotions are attached to all this stuff. So they're like, okay, can I trust, you know, how this idea is presented to engage at this level to motivate responses? So you can understand, you can get a great sit down, come and stay happening within the framework of response that way. But precisely, the dogs aren't actually changing. Okay, that's the thing that people have to really understand here is that, but then this plays in this whole thing about, you know, micromanaging, right? You know, and you're going to hear this. I'm going to keep playing this video, but you know, this falls into line that way, and you know, this is why people are being led into believing things with at a response level with dogs, that basically um, isn't true, okay, in terms of the relationship actually getting better. I mean, understand that you have to connect dots here. I mean, dogs, you know, in terms of relationship, there's depth. Okay, depth meaning through that the social aspect of the relationship, how they connect with us that way. Depth in the sense of, you know, perceptions changing. How does that actually happen? Okay, your role is absolutely critical, but then those core ingredients need to come in, especially once a relationship problem is happening. Okay, understand it's a intervention. It's not a learning-based exercise. I talk about this often on my videos.
Never allow the dog to make mistakes, and I call it micromanage everything with the dog always. I would say that is something that I really, really saw a lot of when I was up there. From the very first lesson I did, the only reason why.
And again, you'll see this in the dog, you know, the dog trainer journey. Okay, and I'm going to be talking a lot about this. I'm putting out a series here through my member area, and it's a very interesting conversation back and forth between Ivan Belanov and Larry Crone. Okay, there's a conversation there. There's going to be a multi-part series. It gets into all this about, you talk about, you know, the various kind of twists and turns here, but understand ultimately there is a process. Okay, so much here is about, in the dog training world, you see this, well, there's more than one way to train a dog. where do you think that statement comes from? Okay, so that comes from appearances. That comes from this issue about, superficially motivating dogs, right? The lack of depth, okay, not connecting dots. And this plays in this issue about the free will of a dog. So yeah, when you look at my videos, they're going to come off looking a certain way. They're going to come off appearing tyrannical because, understand I'm in the middle of a process with dogs that have gained a high level of control. So just think about, again, the way to look at this, and this will make sense when you think about the parent example. When a child is very, very selfish, then as a parent, okay, again, aligning with the authoritative parenting style, that structure has to be defined. It's got to come off a little bit more tyrannical because, the selfish child isn't going to be allowed to go over to their friend's house because, how they're thinking isn't right about certain situations. Okay, you're in the middle of a relationship problem, so you have to curtail, okay, their freedom, right, in the middle of dealing with a relationship problem. And this plays in this whole issue about free will, because the question is, well, what's free? Well, free will's, not really is a problem, okay, because freedom is now a problem. But as a parent, okay, you're interfering in the free will of, okay, you're cutting the child off at the pass, so to speak, because you're in their airspace differently. Okay, parental influence under demand. Everything's coming together a certain way because it has to. But it's temporary. Okay, this is the other thing to keep in mind. So this whole thing about micromanage, this is why you get trainers, because if they draw into this learning-based idea of things, that opens the door up to problems by way of those core ingredients aren't coming in, because it's not a interaction-based method. Okay, it's very much about jumping in this way and motivating dogs to respond. So that door's already wide open. And so what happens is that the problem with that, it keeps you locked into a situation where you're just managing a problem. So you can have the structure there, you can have using crates and everything else, but you never fix it. Okay, because the change part of it is through the interaction part of it. Okay, so it's both, understand that both are in unison together through this system. Okay, so you have the structure. Okay, now you have the change through the right method, okay, the interaction part. So those things combine, they come together. So it is a temporary process, okay? So as things move along, as the relationship gets better, as the possessive dogs change, then the more freedom comes. Because right now, freedom is about a dog will see everything as a type of supply source. And you'll see it. The stinking thinking I talk about. So you see the dog's head, pivoting, investing. That's why I talk about, because understand through the system, you're dialed in differently, the right way. You're dialed into both the relationship, the dog's state of mind. So the role of influence is proactive, okay? You're intercepting. I talk about this a lot, dog's state of mind. So therefore, the dog's going to be more agreeable to it. Everything's going to make sense. There's clarity. So it's about the right method as well, totally. In terms of, talk about structure, micromanaging. Well, understand that all this, this whole thing with the problems here with people figuring this stuff out as to where's that line, or certain themes here that these trainers are talking about. Well, understand it all comes from the superficial idea. Okay, they're all at that level of, within the framework of response of not understanding what a process is. So you have to be, you have to understand. You have to be specific about what the process is. It's a intervention. Okay, it's not a learning-based exercise.
Why the dog was behaving itself is because the owner did not give the dog the option to not behave itself.
So the options here, right? So you have to be careful of that option, because no, it's a power play. Okay, understand once you're in the middle of it, just like think about the same thing. Always think about the parenting example whenever you hear these trainers talking, because the parallels almost exactly the same way.
And some people can look at that and they could say, well, isn't that what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to set the dog up for success. You're supposed to never allow them to rehearse these unwanted behaviors. To which I always say, kind of. In the early teaching stages of things, yes, I want to keep the dog.
So that's the same thing. So what happened too is what these trainers will do, they open it up, and so they jump in this way, and they're motivating. The core ingredients aren't active the way I talk about through a intentional interaction based method. Everything's not lined up. So then they'll start cherry picking. Okay, this is what they'll do. Like, but a lot of these balanced trainers will start to try to cherry pick, correct the dog by way of certain moments. Okay, And so they will bring influence in there, but it's not lined up. It's not coming in the right way. It's not coming in the right level. It's not proactive way I talk about with intercepting the stinking thinking of the dog. So what that does is leaves the door completely wide open for the dog to continue to hold control. Okay, because the integrity of that isn't coming together. And goes into this whole theme of micromanaging. Okay, free will. Okay, just think about that. It'd be no different than, a parent who keeps the whole, in terms of a really selfish child, they're not bringing it together through the right parenting style, the authoritative parenting style. So the structure part, and they're leaving it wide open. That child's continuing to have access to do what they want. So the parental role isn't defined the right way. That's why you have different styles of parenting. Permissive, right? Authoritative. Look at permissive. Everything that, that whole permissive parenting dynamic. You look at the consequences of that, right? So, understand that dogs, I talk about dogs as social animals. Your role is critical. But again, you have to define what a process is. This is why I'm very clear about what it is. So, but again, you put it up against, you kind of, butt it up against this balanced training or force-free training. You'll see the problems. I mean, just don't take my word for it. You just keep looking at the outcomes. You can't get devices off these dogs. You'll see that, especially when you deal with dogs that gained a higher level of control, trainers get blindsided. All of it, you see it because it has to come together. I mean, it's got to come together the right way.
Successful. I want to help navigate all of their decisions so that they're learning what success feels like. But at some point, if we look at the North Star of dog training, which I say all the time, which is that we can micromanage the dog as little as possible, that we can make sure that the dog understands how to make good decisions on its own, and that ultimately the dog is very, very clear in understanding what it is that we want out of them. That does not.
And see, the problem with this is, like, we talk about, this goes into play-based training too. There's trainers out there who will try to figure it out somehow. And so, when these trainers talk about make this good decision, see, it plays into the sit down, come and stay, right? It's very superficial. So, that's the kind of framework. It's not interaction based. So I'm not focused on, response that way. The dog may end up or will end up into the sit position, but it's the interaction part of it. It's the core ingredients part of those interactions. That's my focus. I understand it's different. So these trainers, when they talk about make good decisions, it plays into these superficial responses because that's their framework. Understand the core ingredients aren't coming in through a intentional interaction-based method. And so that's problematic, right? Because that's the framework to define change. And that shouldn't be it, right? Because that leads into because the whole thing is I ask the question, okay, the dog goes into a sit for something like a treat or even to bring a negative by way of the 4 quadrants. My question is, well, what criteria are you using to establish that those responses can be trusted by way of perceptions changing without the core ingredients, okay, influence and control? Well, they're not, okay, because the core ingredients aren't there to begin with. You have to understand what's going on here. So that's not their foundation, okay? So I go in just like I talk about this. Really think about this, put a child under a demand a certain way, you're going to see it. A child is selfish. All right, so understand the core ingredients aren't right to begin with because they're not part of a intentional interaction. They're not part of a interaction-based methodology because these trainers have a different idea of things. And so this is where these conversations about micromanaging, of course, going to say that because they're aligned differently.
Not align with that. Historically, the dog training world has this view on training that is basically control the dog at all times, never allow the dog to make mistakes, and I call it micromanage.
So there you go. So again, my encouragement, okay, anyone looking at this, understand those are the questions because, yes, it will look tyrannical, but so will, a situation involving a parent and a selfish child where the structure has to come together. In fact, the child probably complain that you're being tyrannical, right? You're not. Don't get me wrong, there's over-the-top parenting, the authoritarian parenting style. That's not what I'm talking about. Authoritative, okay, which is the agreed-upon parenting style that all the experts, right, agree on is the right parenting style. But those core ingredients are in there as well. So here, you look at the dog training world. What's a parenting style that you can compare in the dog training world to this ideology? Permissive, okay? Understand a lot of the themes are there. And this is why the real issue never gets fixed because people's attitude about parenting, about discipline, punishment, Again, look at the outcomes. I mean, you just don't take my word for it. Go do your research. Look at just how common it is for dogs to get blamed after coming out on the other side of this inherently flawed process, this idea of things, because it's core ingredients. You have to factor that in, and what's the only way to bring those in the right way, the right level, to create, to establish what needs to happen. Interaction based. Thanks for watching.